When Grace Turner, a 7 months pregnant woman whose face still bore fresh purple bruises, stepped into the Hells Angels clubhouse on a scorching Tucson afternoon, the entire room went dead silent. The big tattoo-covered men stopped laughing mid-sentence. But it wasn't the injuries on Grace's face that froze them in place. It was the trembling sentence that slipped from her cracked lips. "Can someone be my husband for just one day?" They had no idea that plea would set off a journey that would change Grace's life, the life of her unborn child, and the lives of bikers who everyone assumed only knew steel and wind. This is a story about family that doesn't come from blood, but from people who show up exactly when you're at your most desperate. The Tucson afternoon sun was still hammering the asphalt when the steel door of the Hells Angels Tucson chapter swung open, and the whole clubhouse fell into a silence so complete, it felt like someone had cut the sound itself. A 7 months pregnant woman stood in the doorway, Grace Turner, hair tangled, oversized shirt wrinkled, one hand cradling her belly, the other gripping the doorframe to keep from collapsing. Her left eye was swollen shut from bruising, her lips split, breath coming in short gasps like she'd run across half the city. 20 bikers who'd been wrenching on bikes, shooting pool and drinking beer all froze. A pool cue hung motionless in midair. A beer can was set down without a clink. Nobody knew what was happening, but every man in the room felt the same thing. Something was wrong, very wrong. Grace took one shaky step forward, eyes sweeping over the hard faces, thick tattoos, and worn leather cuts. Instead of turning and running, she swallowed hard and spoke, voice so soft the ceiling fans nearly swallowed it. "Can someone be my husband just for today?" Ryder Cole, president of the chapter, had been sitting at the old wooden table. He stood up instantly, his eyes locked on the fresh hand-shaped bruise ringing Grace's throat, round, dark, unmistakable. In that moment Ryder understood, this woman hadn't walked into the wrong place. She had run out of every other place, and if they did nothing right now, mother and child might not live to see morning. Grace reached out to steady herself on the table as Ryder approached. When he quietly asked, "What happened to you?" everything inside her broke open. Words poured out between choked sobs from someone who had endured far too long. Ethan Crow, her ex-boyfriend, a bar bouncer in South Tucson, had been abusing her ever since he learned she was pregnant. Pathological jealousy, controlling her every move, monitoring every step, every text. "He says this baby isn't his," Grace whispered, hand instinctively protecting her belly. "And every time he gets angry he takes it out on me." She told them how he once slammed her against a wall because she was slow answering a text. When she was 4 months pregnant, he grabbed her hair from behind and kicked her in the stomach so hard she thought she'd lose the baby right there. He followed her to doctor appointments, snatched her phone, and smashed it when she tried to dial 911. And last night, after the neighbor's lights went out, he stood outside her door for almost an hour, screaming things that made even these bikers' blood run cold. "I'll bury you before you give birth." The room felt like lead. Grace fought back tears and explained why she had just said the sentence no woman ever wants to say, "I'm begging someone to pretend to be my husband, because I need someone with me to file a protective order. I need someone standing next to me so Ethan knows I'm protected. I need him to give up and disappear from my life. I don't want this baby to start its life in fear." Ghost, the quietest man in the chapter, muttered almost to himself, "I watched this happen to my sister." Hammer's fist clenched until veins bulged, teeth grinding. "That piece of shit should have been in prison a long time ago." Miguel dropped to one knee, trying to meet Grace's eyes. "Are you having any belly pain? Do we need to get you to the ER right now?" Ryder stayed calm and asked the most important question. "Do you have proof?" Grace opened her bag and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Ryder opened it. 17 photographs of bruises on different parts of her body, threatening texts, nurse reports of injuries during pregnancy, neighbors' written statements about hearing screams and crashing from her apartment. Every document hit the thick air like a knife. Ryder took a slow breath, set the stack down, and stood tall. His voice was low, clear, and carried the weight of a man used to making life and death calls. "We're not starting a war." His eyes swept every brother. "We're not breaking the law, a beat. But nobody puts hands on a pregnant woman in this town." Ryder turned back and asked the room, "Who's free tonight?" Not a single second of hesitation. 20 hands, 20 strong arms, shot up at once like steel pillars rising together. A unanimous decision that needed no further discussion. Ryder leaned down, looked straight into Grace's swollen red eyes, and spoke softly but with absolute certainty. "Tonight, you're not standing alone anymore." Ryder gave a signal, and a group of bikers immediately readied bikes to escort Grace home. The brutal Tucson sun had eased, but the pavement still radiated heat like it was holding onto the emotional storm that had just torn through the clubhouse. Grace walked outside, flanked by 2 bikers, Ryder right behind her, 3 more already idling. Nobody spoke, but the air around them crackled with tension, the kind that comes right before a desert thunderstorm. When the convoy rolled out, Grace rode in the chapter's SUV, both hands resting on her belly, as if shielding the baby from memories she didn't want but couldn't shake. She watched through the window, long palm shadows sweeping the road, small shops on South 6th Avenue falling behind, then her neighborhood appearing like an open wound that had never healed. As they turned onto her street, the smell of hot dust, trash and dry grass tightened her chest. Miguel hopped out first, signaling the others to fan out and check the perimeter. Ryder opened Grace's door, one gentle hand hovering behind her back, close enough to catch her, never touching. "Take it slow," he said, voice low and strangely calm. Grace nodded, but her legs shook so badly she could barely lift them. When her apartment door came into view, every biker stopped dead. The once light brown wooden door was dented and warped, as if someone had body slammed it repeatedly. A black boot print sat dead center like a public threat. "He kicked it last night," Grace whispered. 3 times, maybe 4. Ryder eased the door open. It groaned like a cry. Inside, the apartment looked like a tornado had ripped through. Living room mirror shattered, tiny shards glittering across the floor. 3 fist holes punched in the walls. Dining table flipped. Grace's clothes shredded and strewn everywhere. The baby's ultrasound photo crumpled on the ground. Hammer bent down, carefully picked up the small picture, dusted it off, and placed it in Grace's hand with a gentleness rare in a man his size. She stared at the blurry image, lips trembling as she remembered the time Ethan yanked her hair, dragged her down, slammed her head against the table edge, pain shooting through her belly, so bad she was sure her water would break right there on the floor. When the doctor later said the fetus is still okay, she had sobbed from gratitude, and from the terrifying knowledge that one more time might take her baby forever. "I almost lost her twice," Grace whispered, clutching the photo tight. Ryder scanned the destruction, not just seeing mess, but recognizing the battlefield signs men who've seen war know instantly. Escalating violence. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was deliberate destruction and control. "He did all this by himself?" Ghost asked, voice rough. Grace nodded. "He came in the back. I had locked it, but..." She pointed to the bent hinges. Shiloh checked the kitchen and returned holding a phone smashed clean in half. Grace looked at it and exhaustion crashed over her again. "I did call 911, that time." Then he grabbed it and slammed it against the wall. Outside, neighbors peeked from behind curtains or hid behind big cactus pots, eyes full of pity and fear. An older woman whispered shakily to Miguel, "We heard the screaming, but nobody dared help. We're terrified of Ethan. That boy's gone crazy." Others nodded, staring at the ground, ashamed of their own silence. Grace heard it and shrank, wanting to disappear. Ryder stepped onto the porch and looked at each neighbor, not threatening, not starting trouble, just a heavy stare worn by people who've swallowed injustice too many times. When he turned back, Grace stood in the middle of the wreckage, clutching the ultrasound, tiny and fragile amid the chaos Ethan had left. "Grace," Ryder said, voice soft but solid as rock. "From now on, nobody gets to scare you anymore. Nobody." And as engines fired up outside in a chorus of metal promises, Grace felt for the first time that she was no longer alone in the world. 6 o'clock in the evening, the Tucson sky burned blood red, sunset spilling across the Arizona desert like a stain over the Santa Catalina mountains. And in that strange moment, while Grace still stood amid her ruined apartment, an unnatural quiet blanketed the neighborhood, the kind of quiet that warns something bigger, heavier is coming. She closed her eyes for a second, hand on her belly, breathing slow and tired. Ryder stood on the step, staring down the street, as if he could hear something ordinary people couldn't. Then, from so far away no shapes were visible yet, only a faint vibration in the ground. A sound rose, at first just a low growl like thunder building, then growing louder, thicker, bouncing off the concrete, rattling the flimsy apartment walls, slipping through the broken door. Grace opened her eyes, frowning. "What is that?" she asked, voice small, almost afraid of her own question. Ryder didn't answer right away. He lifted his face to the crimson sunset, eyes reflecting the western fire, then said just two quiet words that sent a chill up Grace's spine before she even understood them. "They're here." And right after those words, engines roared to life like a steel storm exploding down the narrow street. No longer a vibration, now a wave slamming straight into every chest. Kids started peeking outdoors. Families crouched behind fences. Mothers pulled children inside, but still stole glances through windows, unable to decide if this was danger or a miracle. Grace limped onto the porch, one hand on the wall to stay upright, and then she saw them, black dots at the far end of the street, lined up like a river of darkness, growing bigger and clearer every second. When 100 headlights snapped on against the red sky, it became a sight she knew she'd carry for the rest of her life. 100 Harley-Davidsons, each one hundreds of pounds of chrome and thunder, formed two perfect lines that merged into a flawless V formation. The point aimed straight at the tiny apartment where Grace stood. They arrived in the kind of silence only people used to battle understand, not an absence of sound, but every other sound drowned beneath the heartbeat of 100 steel machines moving as one army. When the 100 Harleys rolled into her street, pavement shook beneath their boots. Apartment windows rattled. Desert dust rose in thin sheets like fog. Every eye in the neighborhood locked on one spot, Grace Turner's front door, and every face wore the same stunned expression. No one here had ever seen this many bikers gathered at once. They'd heard the stories, heard the noise, heard Ethan's threats, but no one had imagined a response like this. When the V stopped in front of the apartment, engines still idling like continuous thunder filling the whole block, Grace gripped the doorframe, whole body trembling, not from fear, but because she had never in her life felt this protected. 100 bikers, leather, ink, shades, skulls, red patches, killed their engines at the exact same second. The roar cut to total silence, a silence somehow louder than the thunder that came before it. Hammer stood to his left, Ghost to his right, 97 more brothers arrayed perfectly behind. No one looked down, no one turned away, every pair of eyes fixed on Grace's door like a declaration to the whole world that anyone who meant her harm would have to go through all of them. 100 men. Grace brought a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back sobs and failing. Tears fell as her chest clenched with feelings she had no names for. Relief, fear, gratitude, awe, all mixing into a burning flood. She choked out. "They really came." Ryder looked at her, his eyes softening completely. No longer the president, just a man who had decided to protect the fragile life in front of him with everything he had. "Grace," he said, "you're safe now." Grace broke down sobbing, openly, loudly. For the first time, not from pain or terror, but because for the first time in months the world was no longer a locked cage controlled by Ethan. For the first time, someone was on her side. Not one person, not two, 100 Hell's Angels blocking the entire street like a wall of steel. And Grace Turner, the pregnant woman who had trembled while begging one stranger to play husband for a day, now stood before a sight no one could have dreamed. An army of bikers voluntarily forming a shield around her and her unborn child. In that blood-red sunset, for the first time in years, Grace felt fear actually leaving her body, bit by bit. Because tonight, for the first time, she truly had a family standing behind her, a family of leather, steel, and unbreakable kindness. The last sliver of sunset glowed gold on the distant mountains when the 100 Harleys went quiet and another sound appeared, stumbling, warped, reeking of danger. Not engines. A beat-up old GMC roaring at the end of the block, brakes screeching, tires smoking. Ryder spun instantly, eyes flashing from soft for Grace to cold forged steel. The driver door flew open, and Ethan Crowe staggered out, uniform wrinkled, beer bottle still in one hand, nearly 2 feet of steel pipe in the other. The stench of hard liquor hit 10 yards away, eyes bloodshot, hair wild, the face of a man who had drowned last night's rage in a bottle and come up swinging. "Grace," Ethan bellowed, voice raw and slurred. "Where are you? I know you're in there. Get out here." He took a few steps, then froze when he finally saw what blocked his path. 100 bikers in perfect V formation across the street to Grace's apartment. For a second he blinked like he wasn't sure he was seeing right. Then his whole body went rigid with rage and humiliation. "What the hell is this?" he screamed, swinging the pipe skyward. "Grace, you went and got men to scare me? I ain't afraid of a bunch of biker trash." A few brothers leaned forward, But Ryder raised one hand. Just that tiny motion froze all 100 men like statues. Ryder walked forward, out of formation, standing alone in the street, dying light catching every stitch on his cut. Ethan jabbed the pipe toward him. "Or H.O. the hell are you?" Ryder didn't answer the question. He said only one calm sentence, like reading a weather report. "She's not going back to you." Ethan laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "She's mine. I take care of her." No, Ryder cut in, still perfectly even. "You controlled her. You beat her. You nearly killed her baby." Ethan faltered, then roared. "That kid ain't even mine." "It doesn't matter," Ryder said. "Nobody gets to hit a pregnant woman." Ethan took another step, knuckles white on the pipe, shoulders shaking with fury. "You think you know my business? You think you can just walk into my life?" Ryder met his eyes without blinking. "I didn't walk into your life. You walked into hers with violence. And you came here drunk." Ethan suddenly charged, but he only made 3 steps before a wall of bikers stepped forward. Hammer, Ghost, Shiloh, Miguel, and 10 more, standing motionless, never laying a hand on him, yet their presence alone forced him to skid to a halt. He stumbled back a step on instinct, then tried to puff up again. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops? Or you gonna jump me, you biker scum?" Ryder didn't argue. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here," he said. "What you did. Not stories. Proof." Ethan sneered, but his breathing turned ragged as Ryder started pulling items out. "Photos," Ryder said, holding large prints high so Ethan could see every detail. 17 of them. All her bruises, shoulders, back, face, throat, belly at 4 months pregnant. Ethan's face went ash gray. Ryder continued. "Nurse reports. Diagnosed injuries during pregnancy. Doctor statements. Next pages. Your texts. I'll bury you before you give birth. Call 911 again, and I kill you both. Don't let me catch you talking to another man." Ethan's features crumpled like he was being crushed. Neighbors watching from windows began whispering, no longer doubtful, now terrified. Ryder pulled the final sheet. Neighbor statements. "They heard you yelling, heard things breaking, heard her hit the floor. They'll all sign." He held the whole stack out toward Ethan. "This is you," Ryder said. "Not what she says. Not what we say. What you did." Ethan stared at the papers like they were a death sentence. His eyes darted. Ryder, the wall of bikers, Grace's doorway, neighbors' faces behind curtains, then back to Ryder, praying it was a bluff. Ryder said nothing more. He didn't need to. Ethan jerked backward 1 step, then 2. He still tried to scream. "You think you won? I'll be back. I'll be biding." Ryder took half a step forward, just half, but his voice dropped like stone. "No, you won't be back. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Ethan's hands went bloodless on the pipe, whole body shaking now, not from fear of a beating. He understood this was bigger than fists. This was evidence. This was the law. This was the end. He stumbled back to the GMC, spitting curses that didn't even make words, climbed in, fired it up in panic. Tires spun, screeched, left rubber smoke and chaos in his wake. Before he rounded the corner, he rolled the window down and screamed in desperation. "I'll be back. You hear me? I'll be back." His voice was swallowed whole, as 100 Harley engines roared to life at once like the sky splitting open. Ryder never looked after him. He only looked at Grace, standing on the porch, hand over her belly, face pale, but eyes shining with something she'd lost months ago. Hope. "He's not coming back tonight," Ryder said, calm and certain, "and if he ever does," he glanced across the waiting army of brothers, "he'll have to get through every single one of us." Grace couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears fell again, but this time not from pain or terror. For the first time in months she didn't have to face Ethan alone, and even if he ever came back, he would never again find her in the world he once ruled with violence. A new world was forming right here, made of steel, made of engines, made of the kindness of men the whole town used to fear, Hell's Angels. The ones who chose to stand with her, not out of duty, but because she had suffered enough. And tonight, they said, "Enough." As Ethan's GMC vanished around the corner and the screech of burning rubber finally faded from the narrow street, the air around Grace's apartment didn't relax. It just shifted into a taut, vibrating silence, ready to snap the instant any danger returned. Ryder scanned the block for a few more seconds, eyes narrowed as if he could see through every shadow the dying sunset hadn't touched. Finally, he turned to the formation of bikers and gave one short hand signal. 100 men moved at once. No words needed. They were used to dividing tasks, protecting and keeping order in their own clear, efficient, absolute way. 2 teams front and back, Ryder said. Just loud enough to be heard, voice low like metal on metal. Hammer and Ghost nodded, and took nearly 10 brothers each, spreading out across the porch and around the back path, posting up like pillars. Every man carried a high-powered flashlight, an internal radio, and a multi-tool on his belt. None of them looked eager for a fight, but none looked movable either. Shiloh and 2 others opened tool bags and started fixing what Ethan had broken. They pulled off the busted hinges, replaced them with solid steel, torqued every screw until the new door shut with a soft, solid clack that sounded like a promise. The bent deadbolt was swapped for a pick-proof model that would need a grinder to defeat. Miguel and Finch mounted 3 small cameras, one on the front porch, one at the parking corner, one watching the back. All fed straight to Ryder's phone and 2 others. They wanted to be damn sure that if Ethan showed his face again, he'd never get the drop on anyone, and everything would be recorded for the cops. While the work went on, Grace leaned against the doorframe, one hand cradling her belly as if holding the whole world inside, watching strangers put her house back together, screw by screw. A feeling she barely recognized rose in her chest. Safety. Not just because Ethan had run. Safety because she wasn't facing anything alone anymore. Ryder stepped up beside her, voice quieter than before. "You good?" Grace nodded, but her shoulders still trembled. "I don't remember the last time I felt safe." Ryder looked into her eyes, not like a president sizing up a situation, but like a man who'd walked through darkness and recognized it in someone else. "Tonight's gonna be okay," he said. Not empty comfort, a promise backed by an entire chapter. "We're here now." Night settled slowly over Tucson, dragging the day's leftover heat and the smell of desert dust on the wind. The noisy little neighborhood went strangely quiet. Families closed doors early. Porch lights dimmed like they didn't want to intrude. But in Grace's small yard, the leather-clad shadows kept working in near-perfect silence. Hammer, fitting the new deadbolt, muttered to Shiloh, "If that bastard gets through this lock, he's got an angel on his shoulder." Shiloh gave a soft laugh. "If he shows tonight, his angel's off duty." Ghost double-checked the cameras, then told Ryder, "Every angle covered. We'll see him before he sees us." Miguel was inside checking cabinets, installing window pins, making sure the fridge had food for a few days. He turned on the bedroom light, saw the smashed corner, and sighed. "I'll be back tomorrow morning to patch that wall," he told Grace. "You shouldn't have to look at it." Grace stood in the middle of a home that was already halfway put back together, watching men move in and out with screwdrivers, flashlights, radios, industrial glue, like they'd spent their whole lives protecting places the rest of the world walked away from and fixing what violence had broken. She tried to say thank you, but the words stuck in her throat. None of them were waiting for it. When full dark finally came, Ryder signaled everyone to settle. One crew spread jackets and posted up in front of the apartment like stone sentries. Another took the back. 3 stayed in vehicles monitoring live camera feeds. Nobody spoke loud. Nobody cracked beers. Nobody told jokes like they would at the clubhouse. The mood was serious, quiet, but not tense. They weren't here to start trouble. They were here to keep the peace. Miguel walked Grace to the bedroom. "Need water? Any belly pain? Baby kicking weird?" His dead serious face was so earnest, she let out a tiny laugh, the first one in months. "I'm okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Miguel nodded and closed the door so softly it barely made a sound. Grace sat on the bed, hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. For the first time in forever, her heart wasn't pounding with fear. Outside, boots shifted, radios clicked, wind brushed leather, creating a strange rhythm, the rhythm of protection. She laid her head on a pillow that had soaked up tears night after night, but tonight was different. Tonight hallway light wasn't scary. Wind didn't sound like Ethan screaming. Footsteps didn't make her stomach clench. Tonight she wasn't alone. Grace's eyes grew heavy. Her breathing slowed, and for the first time in months, since the first bruise, since the night Ethan dragged her across the floor by her hair, since the moment she thought she might lose her baby, Grace Turner fell into real sleep, deep, peaceful, no shadows, no fear. Outside, Ryder sat on the front step, hands on his knees, eyes locked on the dark far end of the street. When night swallowed everything, he keyed the radio just enough for the watch to hear without waking Grace. Eyes open, tonight's ours. And the whole neighborhood, for the first time in years, felt a peace that didn't come from police, didn't come from fences. It came from 100 men in leather standing guard, over a pregnant woman they'd met only hours ago. To them, she was already family. Outside the little apartment, Tucson night sank into the desert's brand of silence, where you can hear wind scraping tin roofs and insects hiding under dry brush. Grace slept hard inside, breathing steady for the first time in months, while Ryder and nearly 20 brothers kept their posts, eyes cutting through every shadow like ready knives. Close to midnight, the wind suddenly shifted. Hot air ripped open to a cold stream rolling down the street. Arizona thunder weather coming. Ryder lifted his head, sensing something wrong, thumb tightening on the radio. Ghost at the back corner touched his earpiece. Movement, end of the block. Every biker snapped alert, but stayed dead quiet. Then, like a curse circling back, the weaving headlights of Ethan's old GMC appeared again. Only this time he wasn't alone. Two more stumbling figures followed, each clutching a bottle in drunk rage. Ethan slammed his door so hard it bounced back, staggered out, eyes glowing red, breath pure liquor. "Get her out here," he roared, voice raw and cracking like glass. Ryder didn't move. The entire wall of bikers stood frozen like stone. "You biker trash," Ethan kept screaming. "You think you can keep her? She's mine." He grabbed a big rock from the curb and hurled it at Grace's new door. It hit with a loud thunk. Hammer didn't flinch. Nobody broke rank. Ethan threw more rocks, harder, louder, his two buddies joining in, spewing filth. Then he started kicking the door. "Open up." Each kick shook the ground. "Come out. I know she's in there. I'll kill you all." Inside, Grace jolted awake, heart in her throat from the banging. Miguel, posted in the hallway, instantly raised a hand, "Stay put," and signed, "We got this." Outside, Ryder took one calm step forward, not threatening, just enough to show the difference between a drunk storm and the cliff that stops it cold. "Ethan," Ryder said, low and clear, "you were warned today." Ethan let out a crazy laugh. "Warned? I ain't scared." He charged, pipe raised. Before he got close, Ghost leaned just enough to trigger the body cam on his chest. A tiny red light blinked, recording. Another brother hit him with a spotlight that forced Ethan to throw an arm over his eyes. "All on video," Ryder said evenly. "We'll let the cops handle it." At the word cops, Ethan screamed. "Cops can't touch me." He never finished. Sirens rose in the distance. Shiloh had dialed the moment the first rock flew. Two patrol cars turned onto the block, red and blue lights bouncing off every Harley tank. Ethan spun, panic hitting. He tried to run, but drunk legs betrayed him. He slipped, crashed to the ground, crawling toward the GMC like a terrified kid. "Don't let them take me," he yelled at his buddies. But both stood frozen, just as wasted and now just as scared. One threw his hands up. The second officers stepped out. "I ain't part of this." Cops approached, hands on holsters but guns still holstered. They saw 100 bikers standing perfectly still in formation. Nobody crossing the line, a sight so rare they looked twice. "Who called?" an officer asked. Ryder raised a hand. "Criminal damage to property, terroristic threats, assault on a pregnant woman. All recorded." He nodded toward the blinking body cams on Ghost and 3 others. "Second time today. This time with a weapon." Ethan tried to push up, but officers were already on him. "Ethan Crow, I didn't do nothing." "You're under arrest for assault, felony threats, and violating a protective order." The officer cut in. "Hands behind your back." Ethan thrashed, cursing, but in seconds, steel cuffs locked his wrists. He was yanked upright, swaying. Ghost stepped aside so police could walk him out without anyone thinking the bikers interfered. As they dragged him past Ryder, Ethan shrieked one last time. "I'll be back. I'll be's now." Ryder said calmly, "You won't." The nearest officer glanced at Ryder, gave a small nod, like acknowledging these bikers had kept the block safer tonight than the badge ever had. Ethan tore cracked open. She stood there, eyes still wet, hand on her belly. Police lights painted her pale face red. Ethan saw her and wailed in desperation, "Grace, don't let them." They pulled him farther away. His voice shrank into the desert wind. Grace watched it all, and felt her body go light, like someone had lifted a boulder off her chest after years. Ryder walked over, no long speech. He rested a gentle hand on her shoulder, leaving space so she never felt trapped. "He's not coming back," he said. Grace looked up at him, tears falling, but not from fear. "I'm really safe now?" Ryder glanced around. 100 brothers still in formation, eyes sharp as blades, but hearts set on protecting this one woman. "Yeah," he said. "You're safe now, Grace." And for the first time, she believed it was true. When the patrol cars hauled Ethan away and the red-blue lights faded behind the trees, the street in front of Grace's apartment fell into a different kind of quiet. Not the tight silence of waiting for the next blow, but the quiet after a battle is finally over. Ryder looked around once more, confirmed no immediate threat, then turned to Grace. "You can't stay here tonight," he said gently but firmly. "The new locks will hold, but your head won't. Tonight you come to the clubhouse. We already got a room ready." Grace opened her mouth to say she didn't want to impose, to prove she could stand on her own, but her throat closed when she saw the dented door, the broken mirror shards, every mark Ethan had left. Her body trembled. The baby gave one weak kick like a reminder. Finally, she just nodded. Ryder signaled. Miguel and Finch grabbed a few essentials: clean clothes, paperwork, the ultrasound photo, a water bottle. Hammer locked up, double-checked every bolt. Then 3 Harleys fired up as lid. The chapter SUV carried Grace in the middle, and nearly 20 more bikes escorted slowly through the dark streets. The steady thump of engines sounded like a metal heartbeat, loud yet somehow the most peaceful thing Grace had heard in months. She watched Tucson nights slide past the windows, neon Mexican joints, old motel signs, watermelon trucks on the roadside, patches of desert black, all familiar, but tonight different. No feeling of being watched, no dread of a shadow following, no Ethan. When the convoy rolled up to the clubhouse, Grace's mouth actually fell open a little. That afternoon she'd only seen the noisy, oily exterior. Now warm yellow lights revealed something else. Dozens of bikers cleaning, shoving tables aside, hauling stuff out of a small storage room and back. They'd known she was coming, and everyone was already on task. "Here," Ryder said, opening the door and offering a hand to help her down. "Temporary home." Ghost pushed open the door to the little back room. Grace froze. The dusty storage closet from this afternoon was gone. In its place was a small, bright, clean space, walls wiped down, everything neatly stored, brand new mattress with white sheets, a little table with a soft lamp, a ceiling fan, so quiet it was almost silent. A Navajo blanket hung on the wall to hide an old crack. "Nothing fancy," Hammer said, gruff but sincere, but safe. Ghost set up a fetal monitor on the shelf he'd just built 20 minutes ago. "Tracks heartbeat and contractions," he explained. "Alarm if anything's off. Sleep easy." Hammer double-checked the outlets, tightening the last screw. Old wiring sparks. Not putting a pregnant woman anywhere risky. Finch carried in a small chair and set it by the bed. "If you gotta get up at night, grab this." Miguel came in last with bottled water and crackers. "Babies make you dehydrated," he said. "We don't know much about pregnancy, but we know how to keep people safe." Grace covered her mouth, not from shock, but to hold back sobs. She turned a slow circle, touching the new sheets, the lamp, the little shelf, all simple, but the first truly safe place she'd had in years. No angry footsteps outside the door, no key turning in the lock, no yelling, no Ethan. "Good Lord," she whispered. "I've never had a home this peaceful." Ryder stood in the doorway, arms loosely crossed, eyes softer than when he'd faced Ethan down. "Grace," he said, "you've got a room. You've got food. You've got people outside that door. But most important, you've got people on your side." She turned, tears streaming, not pain or exhaustion this time, but the feeling she'd lost long ago, being valued. Ryder stepped closer, not touching, voice warm enough to reach her heart. "Nobody in this clubhouse is letting you sleep scared again." Outside the room came the quiet sounds of boots, bikes moving, low voices like background music of safety. Someone made up a bed. Someone adjusted a camera. Someone brewed ginger tea. Someone checked the back door again. Someone hung an extra curtain for privacy. When Grace finally sat on the edge of the bed, hand on her belly, listening to the monitor's steady beep, beep, like a lullaby, she knew. Tonight she and her baby had found their first real shelter after months of violence. Not by blood, not by rules, by the kindness of men society usually calls dangerous. But tonight they were angels, hell's angels. And for the first time in forever, Grace Turner knew she was allowed to breathe. From the first night Grace slept peacefully in the clubhouse, her life shifted to a rhythm she never imagined she could reach. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the small window and spilled across the safe little room. Grace opened her eyes with a strange feeling. No shoulder pain, no bruised hip throbbing, no angry boots in the living room, no male shadow waiting to unload rage on her body. Just the distant sound of bikes warming up, someone's coffee brewing, and the steady heartbeat of her baby on the monitor. She sat up, hand on her belly, filled with a feeling both sweet and unfamiliar, like invisible shackles had finally fallen off. When she opened the door, Ryder, Ghost and Hammer were already there, like they'd been waiting for the day to start. "How was the first morning in the new place?" Ryder asked, voice no longer sharp from last night, almost gentle. Grace nodded, a little shy. "I haven't slept like that in months." Hammer gave a soft laugh, something that seemed impossible from a giant covered in ink. "We ain't even started yet," he said, then waved toward the backyard. Boom. The rear door swung open, and Grace's heart actually bloomed for the first time. Miguel and 3 brothers carried in a brand new wooden crib still half wrapped in plastic. "We were gonna let you sleep more," Miguel said, "but we gotta assemble this thing while it's still cool." Before Grace could process, the storage room started turning into a real nursery. Ghost rolled out a soft rug so the crib wouldn't slide. Hammer measured a wall and began painting a warm pale beige, gentle on newborn eyes. Shiloh hung a set of small frames on the wall, simple drawings of clouds, tiny motorcycles, and Arizona desert patterns. "Got these from the shop on 4th Avenue, he said, when Grace stared hand over her mouth. "Owner heard your story, gave 'em free." Grace was speechless. Every one of them, men the whole town crossed the street to avoid, was standing here in leather paint on their hands, heads bent over screws, like they'd trained their whole lives to build a room for one baby. Her baby. The baby Ethan called, not mine. The baby he'd once kicked in her belly to see if she'd scream. Now that same baby was the reason an entire chapter lined up waiting to be told if they could help more. When the crib was finished, Hammer tapped the side. Solid knock knock. "If your little girl rolls like we did when we were kids," he said, "this thing ain't moving." Grace laughed. A real laugh. No tremble, no shards, no force. Just laughter. Every biker turned to look, not to tease, but like they just heard the sound they'd been working to give her back. A laugh without fear. A week later, Grace's life had a completely new rhythm. Ryder took her to every prenatal visit. He didn't talk much on the rides, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was the kind of quiet from someone who knows sometimes presence matters more than questions. At Banner University Medical Center, every nurse's eyes went wide as saucers. A Hells Angels president walking a pregnant woman in, holding her elbow, handing her water, carrying her jacket. It wasn't in any of their scripts. When the doctor turned the ultrasound screen, the baby's heartbeat filled the room. Fast, strong, perfect. Grace cried. Ryder just stared at the screen like he was witnessing something holy he didn't dare interrupt. On the way home, she whispered, "I thought she was damaged from all the times Ryder cut her off." "She's tough," he said, "like her mom." Grace blushed and looked out the window. By the end of the second week, somehow the story of the pregnant mom protected by Hells Angels had spread across Tucson. So the club did what they called a biker-style baby shower. Grace didn't know what that meant, just that they told her to be in the backyard at 5 p.m. When she walked out, Ryder stood waiting, hands behind his back. Nearly 30 brothers lined up like an honor guard on both sides. Shiloh fired up a Harley decorated with pastel ribbons. Someone had done it in secret, the rumble sounding like a ceremonial salute. Miguel handed her a tiny soft leather vest with Little Angel, Tucson chapter family stitched on the back. Ghost brought out a child-sized helmet, purely for photos, and placed it beside the crib with a gentleness bizarre on a man almost 6'9". Hammer gave a toy tool set, safe kid versions, so she can start wrenching when she's half our size. He grinned. Finally, Ryder stepped forward and gave her a simple card. Inside, one line, "Here, nobody starts life alone." Grace lost it the moment she read it. She'd never had a baby shower. No one had ever made things for her daughter. No one had ever held her and told her she wasn't alone. Here, she was loved in a way she'd never tasted in her whole life. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. One afternoon, Miguel knocked softly. "If you want," he offered, "I can teach you a little self-defense, not to fight. Just so you know your body is still yours." Grace hesitated, then nodded. Every small move, elbow strike, shoulder check, back step, hip turn, Miguel taught slowly, gently, never once making her flinch. After an hour, she was breathing hard, sweat and emotion both pouring out. "I'm so weak," she whispered. Miguel shook his head. "No," he said. "Weak people don't survive what you survived." Grace stood still, And for the first time she believed it, not politeness, truth. Asterisk, 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 day after day, the room filled with real life. The beige crib stood solid, cloud pictures on the wall, soft rug, fresh paint smell gone, warm lamplight making circles on the wall each night. But the biggest change wasn't the room, it was Grace. She ate and slept on a schedule. The bruises on her neck vanished. The dark marks on her arms faded. She walked straighter, eyes no longer glued to the ground like someone might block her path. The baby kicked strong and steady. Grace smiled more. Every checkup Ryder said, "You look better than yesterday." And Grace started answering. "I know." One night, desert wind slipping through the window, Grace sat on the bed looking at her daughter's crib, a crib built with heart by men she used to be terrified to pass on the street. She laid a hand on her belly and whispered, "Baby girl, you've got a whole family waiting for you out there." Outside in the hallway, Ryder passed by, glanced in, saw Grace smiling at the crib. He paused a second, didn't knock, didn't speak. But in that moment, seeing Grace no longer shaking but truly at peace, he knew they hadn't just saved her from one nightmare night. They were giving her back a whole life, and the unborn baby for the first time in months had a future. That fateful night came when no one expected it. After a rare calm day when Grace had just smoothed the thin blanket over the crib and sat on the bed to slip off her worn sandals. Outside, desert wind rose, carrying the smell of dry earth and the rattling of palm fronds against each other. Tucson rarely gets rain, but tonight black clouds rolled in from the west, stacking into an arc like they meant to swallow the whole city. Grace hugged her belly, feeling the baby kick softly, already used to the safe movements inside the clubhouse. Then, in a single second, a sharp, deep stab of pain tore through her abdomen, so fierce she had to grab the bed frame to keep from doubling over. Her breath broke. 1 beat. 2 beats. Then her water broke. Warm fluid rushed down both legs, soaked the rug, spread into a widening circle. Grace looked down, face going white. No, not now. She tried to stand, but the next contraction hit harder, forcing a choked cry from her throat. She reached for her phone just as the door flew open. Miguel was already there, eyes wide but moving with total calm. "Grace? What's Tuv?" He saw the floor. No more questions needed. Water broke. "Okay, I'm getting everyone." What followed was a whirlwind that somehow never felt chaotic. In under 30 seconds, Ryder was at the door, one arm around Grace, the other keying the radio for the whole chapter. "Everyone to the yard. Emergency escort formation. We're going to Banner, now." Outside, metal chairs scraped, boots pounded, then 20 Harley engines roared to life at once, a sound that tore through the clubhouse like thunder. Grace was panting, drenched in sweat, fingers digging into Ryder's cut. "Ryder, I'm scared." "I know," he said, leaning close so she heard his voice more than his words. "But you're not alone. Not tonight. Never again.
Hold my hand."
Miguel and Shiloh half carried her outside, shielding her from the first heavy drops. The season's first desert storm hit like the opening scene of a movie, wind whipping rain ponchos, water slamming the pavement into shining sheets under streetlights. Grace looked at the lot, 20 Harleys already lined up at the gate, headlights blazing, every rider ready like a special ops team. "Let's roll," Ryder shouted, and the bikes answered with a roar. The chapter's SUV was prepped for Grace. Miguel opened the back door, spread towels, eased her in, buckled her gently but firmly. Ryder slid into the passenger seat up front. "Hold my hand." She grabbed it, breathing hard as another contraction squeezed. "It hurts so bad." "I know." Deep breath. "Count with me." Ryder held her hand like an anchor in the storm. A brother in back slapped the roof, ready. The gate crashed open. The SUV shot forward, 20 Harleys spreading into perfect wings on both sides. They didn't speed. They moved with precision. 2 bikes cleared the front. 4 guarded the flanks. 8 blocked the rear, the rest ready to intercept anything that tried to cut in. In the pounding rain, the Harleys sounded like war drums. Headlights reflected off wet asphalt like rivers of light. Every time the SUV rocked in the wind, Ryder squeezed her hand tighter. "You're still here," he said. "You and the baby are okay." Grace nodded, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. Not sure if they were from pain or from never having someone beside her in a moment this big. The convoy turned onto Speedway Boulevard, straight for Banner University Medical Center. Rain hammered harder, but the riders never slowed. They flew like an arrow, tires slicing water, turn signals blinking in perfect sync, an army of steel guarding one woman fighting between life and fear. How far? Grace gasped. 2 minutes, Ryder answered, squeezing gently. I'm right here. The next contraction made her cry out. Miguel twisted around from the front. Deep breaths, Grace. You got this. Damn, that girl's strong. Ryder laid his free hand lightly on her belly, just to comfort, never to press. Grace, look at me. She forced her eyes open, soaked with tears. You've got this, Ryder said, voice cutting through the rain. I swear you do. Finally, the SUV swung into Banner's ER bay. 2 night shift nurses saw 20 Harleys escorting a laboring pregnant woman and froze for several seconds. A brother leapt off his bike, yanked the door open. Ryder scooped Grace into his arms. Rain poured over him, soaking his cut, but he didn't care. Delivery room, where? He demanded. She's in labor. The nurses snapped out of it and led the way. Grace was lowered onto a gurney. She clutched Ryder's hand so hard his knuckles went white, but he never pulled away. Come with me, please, she begged, voice shaking. Until the doctors make me leave, Ryder said. I'm not going anywhere. At the delivery room doors, a nurse said, family only. Grace gripped Ryder tighter. He's my husband. Ryder froze, not from surprise, but from the weight of those words hitting harder than he'd ever prepared for. The nurse nodded and pulled him in. In the bright white room, the fetal monitor beeped steady. Beep, 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 beep. Grace breathed fast, face twisting with the next contraction. Ryder leaned down, forehead almost touching hers for a second, voice low and burning. Look at me. You are not alone. You are never alone again. Then the doctor came in and asked Ryder to step behind the yellow line. He let go of her hand but never took his eyes off her face. Ryder, she called, voice breaking. I'm here, he answered, palm pressed to the glass door. Grace looked back at him just before the door closed, and between the rain outside, the doctor's footsteps, the racing monitor, something strange happened. Grace wasn't afraid anymore, not because the pain lessened, but because she knew Ryder Cole was standing right outside that door, with 20 brothers behind him, and an entire chapter behind them, an army of steel making damn sure this birth happened in perfect safety. The storm outside could rage all it wanted. The storm inside Grace's life, for the first time, was finally ending. Thanks to men everyone warned were dangerous. Tonight they were on angel duty. Inside the delivery room, hurried footsteps mixed with the steady heartbeat on the monitor. The air so thick one extra breath might tip the world sideways. Grace gripped the bed rails, sweat pouring off her temples, breathing like she'd sprinted across the Arizona desert. Outside the glass, Ryder stood motionless, palms braced against the window as if letting go would drop every heart in the waiting area to the floor. Rain hammered the big windows like someone hurling wet sand at the Tucson night, loud, violent, but it couldn't drown out Grace's ragged breathing leaking through. Push, Grace, the doctor said, calm but firm. Baby's coming great, just a little more. Grace turned her head, searching for Ryder through the fogged glass. Their eyes locked, one brief second that gave her breath back, gave her body the final strength. She nodded faintly. Ryder pressed his hand to the glass like he was holding hers. I'm here, he mouthed, knowing she couldn't hear through the soundproofing. But Grace read his lips, and that was enough. The next contraction crashed over her like a wave, deep, burning, unstoppable. Grace clenched her teeth and screamed the primal scream of a mother bringing life into the world. That's it, Grace. One more. You've got this. Ryder nearly shouted, voice cracking under the weight in his chest. And then a cry. A high, fierce cry that cut through the storm outside, through 7 months of layered fear, through every bruise Ethan had left. A cry of life. The room went still for half a second. Then the doctor laughed softly and announced loud, "It's a girl. Healthy. Perfect." Grace collapsed back, tears streaming like the rain outside. A nurse placed the tiny red warm baby on her chest. Grace was gasping, but her trembling arms had never been stronger. "Hi, baby," she whispered, lips brushing the tiny forehead. "Amelia, my daughter." The baby cried once more, then nuzzled into Grace's skin like she already knew exactly where she belonged. Grace held her, no longer noticing sweat, pain, or the storm. In that moment the world shrank to just the two of them. A mother who survived and a new life born from pure resilience. "You're safe now," Grace whispered, voice breaking. "You're safe, I promise." Outside, Ryder stood frozen. He'd heard the cry through the glass, seen the nurse lift the baby, seen Grace take her child for the first time. His breath caught. In 20 years Ryder Cole had never cried. Not when his mother died. Not when his best friend went down. Not on any dark night he shouldn't have survived. But in that moment, watching Grace Turner, the terrified woman who once walked into the clubhouse begging for a husband for one day, now holding the tiny life that had survived violence and terror, his eyes burned, stung, and tears rolled down his cheeks completely out of his control. Miguel stepped up beside him, quiet for a few seconds, then murmured, "You're really crying, Prez." Ryder sucked in a sharp breath, swiped the tears away like he could hide that moment of weakness. "Shut up, Miguel." Miguel grinned but said nothing more, because he understood. They all did. Those weren't weak tears. They were the tears of a man who had spent his life standing in front of storms for others, but rarely got to see the miracle that comes after. A nurse opened the delivery room door and looked out. "Family for Grace Turner?" Ryder stepped forward like an invisible string pulled him. "That's me. She wants you." Ryder walked in slowly, afraid to shatter the sacred air. Grace looked up when she saw him. Eyes still red, hair plastered with sweat, but her smile was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Ryder," she whispered. He came closer, looked down at the tiny bundle in her arms, a little life wrapped in white black baby hair, tiny fist curled against her chest. "This is Amelia," Grace said. "Do you want to hold her?" Ryder froze like the room had run out of oxygen. "Me? You," Grace repeated. The nurse nodded reassuringly, and Ryder, for the first time in his life, took a newborn into trembling hands. Amelia sighed softly against him, then cracked her eyes open, tiny black eyes full of life. Ryder looked at her, and the heart that knew engines, desert storms, and battles suddenly turned to soft summer sand. "Welcome to the world, little one," he whispered. "Here, you'll never have to be afraid again." Amelia squirmed, pressed her cheek into his rough palm, and Ryder Cole, the man all of Tucson swore never cried, wiped fresh tears away. Grace watched and knew. Tonight her daughter wasn't just born, she was welcomed, by a mother who survived, by a man who chose to protect them, by a family of steel, wind, and unbreakable kindness. And in that rainy Tucson night, as distant thunder faded, Amelia Turner fell asleep for the first time in the arms of the man everyone used to fear. But from this moment on, in Grace's eyes, Ryder was the opposite. He was peace. He was family. 3 months after that stormy night, Tucson baked into summer, the pavement shimmering under brutal heat, but Grace Turner's life had cooled into something she never dared dream of. Amelia, now 3 months old, slept in the crib beside the window of their new little house, bright, modest, north of the city near River Road, where traffic was softer and no shadow waited behind any door. Grace stood over the crib, brushing the silky black hair, watching chubby cheeks, and the steady rise and fall of a chest that had been a miracle on a stormy night. She kissed Amelia's forehead, drew the curtain just enough, and let her sleep. On the kitchen table lay the court letter Ryder had brought that morning. Ethan Crow, 18 months prison, 5-year no-contact order, mandatory counseling. Grace stared at it a long time, hands trembling slightly, not from fear anymore, but from the simple truth that it was finally over. No more angry knocks, no more threatening footsteps, no one lurking in the dark. She hadn't gone to sentencing. Ryder had said, "You never have to see him again," and she believed him. She folded the letter, locked it in the small file box bought with her first paycheck from the quiet 4-hour job at an office supply shop on Speedway. Nothing heavy, nothing loud, nothing stressful. The rest of the day was hers and Amelia's. Simple, modest, but hers. Controlled by no one. Hit by no one. Threatened by no one. The new life, a real beginning. At noon the familiar rumble of engines rolled up outside, not the violent growl of the night. Ethan came, but the steady, easy Harley sound Grace had learned to smile at. She scooped Amelia up, opened the door, and saw Ryder on the step with Ghost and Hammer. Leather cuts, but no tension in their faces like the early days. Ryder climbed the first step and held out a big paper bag. Diapers, wipes, and the lotion Ghost picked. Grace laughed. Ghost picked lotion. Ghost, built like a power pole, beard down to his chest, voice like gravel, actually blushed. "It's good for baby skin," he muttered. "Nurse at Banner said so." Hammer elbowed him. "You really asked the nurse? Who else was gonna ask?" Ghost shot back, then looked away to hide his grin. Ryder watched the whole thing, corner of his mouth twitching, but still calm as ever. "We came to check if you two need anything," he said. "Miguel and Finch are swinging by later to fix that ceiling fan. It's wobbling." Grace laughed again. "It's just a tiny wobble. Tiny gets fixed," Ryder said. "This house stays 100% safe." His eyes drifted inside, to the crib, the Navajo blanket, the cloud pictures Shiloh had hung the day they moved in. "You doing okay here?" Grace nodded, smile so wide, she couldn't remember the last time she'd smiled like this. "I'm doing okay, more than okay. I'm peaceful." Ryder bent to look at Amelia, now wide awake, black eyes like drops of ink. "Hey, little girl," he said softly. "Miss me?" Amelia flailed, drool shining at the corner of her mouth like an answer. Ryder held out his hands, eyebrows raised in question. Grace nodded, and he took Amelia against his chest. Even after holding her that night in the hospital, he still looked like a man holding something more precious than his own life. "She's gotten big," he said, wonder in his voice. "Look at her, strong like Grace." Hammer called from behind. Grace felt warmth flood her chest. The painful days were behind her. The nights clutching her belly in fear were gone like that storm's rain. Now every day brought Harleys pulling up. Someone asking need anything, someone hanging a new toy on the crib, someone checking windows, someone stopping by just to hold Amelia for 10 minutes because they missed her. Ryder handed Amelia back, his fingers brushing Grace's barely a touch, but enough for both of them to feel what didn't need words yet. The bond between them wasn't just fear and protection anymore. It was something honest, quiet, and growing with every one of Amelia's breaths. Ghost cleared his throat. "Hammer and I'll head back to the clubhouse." "Prez, you stay." Grace glanced at Ryder. Ryder glared at Ghost like he was about to throw an entire Harley at him, but Ghost just shrugged. "Everybody already sees it, Prez." "Sees what?" Grace asked lightly. Ghost pointed at Amelia. "Kid looks at Ryder different, and Ryder looks at the kid different." Hammer nodded like he was delivering gospel. "Sounds like a little family." Ryder sighed, gave them both a light punch to the shoulder, enough for them to laugh and ride off. When their engines faded, Ryder stayed on the porch. The rain was long gone, sky clear, no storms. Amelia dozed again on Grace's shoulder, breathing steady like the heartbeat of a life started right. 3 months already, Grace said softly. "And every day I think, if I hadn't walked into that clubhouse that night." Grace Ryder cut in, stepping close but still respecting her space. "You walked in. You chose to live. Everything after that, we just did our part." Grace looked at Amelia, then at Ryder, and for the first time in her life saw a future that wasn't a dark door full of shouting. It was a bright, open road with Harleys riding escort on both sides. "Ryder," she whispered. "Thank you." He shook his head gently. "Grace, you don't owe us anything. We helped because you and Amelia deserve to live safe." A soft breeze moved across the porch, carrying dry grass and golden sun. Ryder looked at mother and daughter like he was confirming something he'd known for a long time. They had walked into his life in a way no one in the chapter ever had. And when Amelia wrapped her tiny fist around his finger, small but sure, Ryder knew. This family, blood or not, was the realest thing he'd had in years. Hell's Angels still came by every day, not to guard anymore, to love. And Grace Turner's new life, mother of Amelia, was finally beginning exactly where it was meant to, in peace, in freedom, and in the arms of men everyone called dangerous. But to her, they were the ones who brought the light. One late afternoon toward the end of the month, Tucson softened under honey gold sunlight, the desert wind carrying the familiar warmth of summer. Grace was nursing Amelia when Ryder sent a single short text, 5 p.m. clubhouse. "Bring Amelia." No explanation, no extra details, just pure Ryder Cole style. Grace felt a flicker of worry mixed with curiosity, but her gut told her this wasn't bad news. She changed Amelia into a cream-colored onesie, added a thin knit cap, and buckled her into the car seat. As she pulled up to the clubhouse, her heart actually skipped. This wasn't the usual scattered row of Harleys. This was an army. 100 Harley-Davidsons formed a perfect circle around the big front lot. 100 men in leather cuts stood in formation, silent, solemn, so still the scene looked more like a military ceremony than a biker gathering. Ryder stood dead center, hands clasped behind his back, black cut with its red flaming patch catching the light like fire. The setting sun painted him into a towering silhouette against the orange sky. Miguel walked over and opened her door. "Let's go," he said with a smile, so gentle it looked strange, on a man covered head to toe in ink. Hammer carried the car seat for her while Ghost adjusted the little blanket over Amelia's legs. Grace looked around, breath slowing with emotion. What is all this? Welcoming ceremony, Ghost answered, voice low, for Amelia. As they stepped into the center of the circle, every single biker removed his helmet in perfect unison and placed a hand over his heart. Not a threat, but respect so rare from men who'd lived their whole lives on the edge of steel and storms. Ryder walked forward. He looked at Grace first, then down at Amelia, sound asleep. Do you remember the first night you came here? Grace nodded, eyes already stinging. I was terrified. I was broken. I just wanted to live and keep my baby alive. Ryder's voice stayed low but warm. When you asked for one guy to pretend to be my husband, we knew it wasn't about romance. It was because you had no one left to stand behind you. He pulled a small leather-wrapped bundle from behind his back and placed it in Grace's hands. But now it's different. Grace unwrapped it and her hands actually shook. This time not from pain but from a flood of feelings all hitting at once. Inside was a miniature leather cut, real Hell's Angels style, sized for a child no bigger than half an arm. The back patch read in perfect stitching, Angel's daughter, forever family. Grace pressed a hand to her mouth, trying and failing to hold back the sob. Amelia stirred in the car seat, tiny eyes blinking open just as Grace looked at Ryder. Ryder, her voice cracked. Why did you do this? Ryder stepped closer, fingertips brushing the tiny vest. Because she was born in a storm, and we want her to grow up in peace. He turned to the circle of brothers. 100 men stood straighter, eyes locked on the 3-month-old blinking innocently. Starting today, Amelia is not just Grace's daughter. Ryder's voice rang out strong, like an oath carved in the desert air. She is Angel's daughter. Her blood may not be ours, but our name will protect her for the rest of her life. The wind itself seemed to pause, or maybe it was Grace's heart stopping before it pounded harder, faster. She turned to Ryder, tears streaming down both cheeks. Ryder, that night, her voice broke. I only asked for one person, just one. And then she cried out loud, not the cry of pain, but the cry of someone who had finally opened the door to safety after years of fighting darkness. But you, she gasped. You gave me an entire army. Ryder didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Grace bent and kissed Amelia's forehead, and the baby let out the tiniest baby laugh, soft as wind. Yet it rang like a bell in that moment. 100 bikers thumped fists to chests in perfect rhythm, a drumbeat that rolled through the dry Tucson air into a promise words could never match. A brother in the back shouted, "Welcome to the family, Amelia." And 100 voices answered like thunder, "Welcome to the family." Ryder laid a hand on Grace's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he said. Low, steady, and absolutely true. And Amelia will never have to start her life without people standing behind her. Grace looked at the circle of Harleys, at rough men whose eyes had gone soft for a 3-month-old baby. She looked at the tiny leather cut in her hands, then at Ryder, the man who had stepped out of the storm to become the place she could finally trust. And she knew this wasn't just a ceremony. This was family. The kind of family Grace Turner had never known existed. Family made of leather, of steel, of kindness that lasts as long as Harleys roar in the desert wind. And Amelia, Angel's daughter, would grow up inside that circle. Tucson's sunset spilled across the desert like an orange velvet blanket, the last light painting rooftops, street lights, and every Harley in long shadows that stretched to the horizon. After the welcome to the family ceremony, Grace carried Amelia out of the clubhouse, Ryder right beside her, the circle of leather cuts parting into a pathway. One by one the Harleys were rolled out of formation, engines fired for a single heartbeat, then idled low like a respectful salute. Desert wind brushed Grace's hair, carrying the familiar scent of engine oil and something she never thought she'd grow attached to, the feeling of truly belonging somewhere. "Ready to go home?" Ryder asked, glancing at Amelia dozing in the car seat. Grace nodded, squeezing his hand lightly. "He never thought he'd ever be able to call any place home," Ryder smiled. "The rare, real one he only let out when every guard was down. Now you do, both of you." Miguel opened the SUV door. Hammer loaded Amelia's bag in back, and Ghost double-checked the car seat one last time. When Grace was buckled in, Ryder shut the door but didn't step away. He rested a hand on the frame and leaned down so their eyes were level. "Grace," he said slowly, "when you walked into that clubhouse you asked for one man, but we knew. You deserved a hell of a lot more." Grace smiled, eyes wet but steady. "I know, because of you." Ryder shook his head. because you survived." Then he stepped back and raised two fingers. Like a steel choir answering its conductor, 100 Harleys roared to life at once. The sound rolled across the Tucson sky, past houses, past tall palms, into the cracks of the Catalina Mountains, a declaration that tonight they were escorting family home. The convoy moved slow and proud. 20 bikes led the way, the SUV carrying Grace and Amelia in the center, and a long tail of Harleys behind like a glowing metal dragon. The whole world seemed to hush, just to let that sound pass. When they reached Grace's house, the convoy stopped. Ryder got out first and opened her door. She lifted Amelia into her arms and looked at the line of Harleys glowing under the dying sun. A soft breeze carried warm asphalt and sunlight, engines idling down into a steady heartbeat, the heartbeat of a family she never expected to have. "Ryder," she whispered. He looked at her, eyes warm as sunlight on sand dunes. Grace kissed Amelia's forehead, then whispered, not just to her daughter, but to every man standing in front of her house, "Family is the people who show up when the world turns its back on you." Ryder nodded once, slow, like he was carving those words into the air itself. A brother in the back yelled, "Love you, little angel," and dozens of voices rolled in behind him like waves on rock. As the convoy finally pulled away, Grace stood holding Amelia in the fading light, watching 100 Harleys flow together like a river of red fire, carrying the sound of a family fate had sent exactly when she needed it most. And if you're watching this story, remember the simplest, strongest thing Grace Turner ever learned. Family isn't blood. Family is the people who choose to stay when life walks out on you. If this story touched you, hit follow and ride with us, because every week there's another true story about resilience, kindness, and the right people showing up when you think no one's left. See you on the next ride.